The neighborhood had been designed to look calm, orderly, and respectable. The kind of place where every lawn matched the next and every mailbox followed the same strict measurements. It was governed by an HOA that advertised itself as a protector of property values and community standards, but over time, that authority had quietly morphed into something else entirely. Rules were enforced unevenly, warnings were issued selectively, and certain people walked the streets with a confidence that came not from ownership, but from control. At the center of that control stood one woman who treated the neighborhood like her personal jurisdiction. She wasn't officially the president of the HOA, but she behaved as though she outranked everyone, including the board itself. She monitored driveways, photographed license plates, and memorized which vehicles belonged to which houses. To her, anything unfamiliar was a problem waiting to be confronted. The truck became that problem. It was parked neatly in a driveway, aligned properly, not blocking sidewalks or violating any visible rules. It wasn't rusted, abandoned, or noisy. It simply didn't fit her idea of what should be there. Larger than most cars in the neighborhood and clearly used for real work, the truck stood out among polished sedans and compact SUVs. To her, standing out was reason enough. She had already decided that the truck did not belong, long before confirming any facts. In her mind, it violated an unspoken rule about appearances. The HOA covenants were thick, filled with vague language about aesthetics and community harmony, and she had learned how to weaponize those phrases whenever she wanted something removed. From her perspective, the truck was a challenge to her authority. She began by circling it slowly, inspecting it as if she were conducting an official investigation. She checked the tires, the plates, the windows, and the locks. Nothing about it suggested neglect or illegality. It was clean, registered, and clearly in use. That only seemed to irritate her more. She wanted a reason, and when she couldn't find one, she decided to create one. She convinced herself that the truck must be unauthorized, perhaps belonging to a guest who had overstayed or a resident who hadn't filled out the proper forms. She told herself that HOA rules gave her broad access to inspect property for violations. Over the years, she had pushed that interpretation further and further, rarely challenged, often obeyed. This time she planned to take it a step further. From her purse, she produced a key. She referred to it proudly as a master key, a symbol of her imagined reach. In reality, it was a generic tool she claimed worked on community-owned locks, storage units, and maintenance access points. She believed it would grant her entry to whatever she decided fell under HOA authority. She had never been told otherwise, and no one had stopped her before. Standing in full view of nearby homes, she attempted to unlock the truck. The key did not turn. She tried again, applying more pressure, glancing around to see if anyone was watching. Still nothing. The lock resisted completely, unchanged by her efforts. Her confidence wavered for a brief moment, replaced by confusion and irritation. The idea that something in her neighborhood could resist her control did not sit well with her. Instead of stepping back, she leaned in further. She examined the door handle, checked the other side, and even tried the truck bed. Each attempt failed. The truck remained sealed, unbothered, silent. What should have been a clear sign to stop only fueled her frustration. In her mind, the truck wasn't defying her. It was insulting her. She concluded that the problem wasn't her authority, but the owner. She decided the owner must be hiding something. Maybe the truck was stolen. Maybe it was being used for unapproved business activity. Maybe it was parked there illegally. The lack of evidence didn't matter. Her suspicions were enough to justify escalation. She pulled out her phone. When she called the police, she framed the situation carefully. She didn't mention trying to unlock the truck. Instead, she described a suspicious vehicle, possibly abandoned, possibly tied to illegal activity. She emphasized safety, security, and her role in protecting the community. She presented herself as a responsible HOA representative doing her duty. The call gave her a renewed sense of power. As she waited, she positioned herself near the truck, arms crossed, posture firm. already rehearsing how the situation would unfold. In her mind, the officers would arrive, thank her for her vigilance, and force the owner to comply. The truck would be removed or cited, and her authority would be reaffirmed in front of the entire street. What she did not consider was the existence of cameras. The truck was equipped with multiple security systems, including motion sensors and discrete exterior cameras. Every attempt to unlock it, every angle she approached from, every second she lingered near it, had been recorded. The footage had already been uploaded and stored, time-stamped and clear. Inside the nearby house, the truck's owner had already seen the alerts. From the first notification, there was confusion, then disbelief, then concern. Watching someone attempt to access private property without permission was unsettling, especially when that person acted with such confidence. As the footage continued, it became clear that this was not a mistake or misunderstanding. It was deliberate. The owner did not rush outside, instead they waited. They knew that confronting her directly would only escalate the situation in unpredictable ways. They also knew that the truth was now documented. The footage told a complete story, one that did not rely on interpretation or accusation. It showed intent, action, and persistence. When police sirens eventually echoed through the neighborhood, the HOA woman straightened, satisfied. Neighbors peeked through blinds and windows, sensing drama but unsure of its source. The calm, controlled image of the community began to crack as attention shifted toward the driveway and the truck at its center. The officers arrived expecting one thing and unknowingly stepped into something else entirely. As they approached, the HOA woman launched into her version of events, gesturing toward the truck and the surrounding homes, framing herself as the protector and the unseen owner as the problem. She spoke with confidence, assuming the uniform alone would validate her authority. What she didn't realize was that the story had already moved beyond her control. Because while she was waiting to be validated, the truth was about to surface, one recorded moment at a time, and the power she thought she held was about to be questioned in ways she never anticipated. The police presence changed the atmosphere of the street instantly. What had been a quiet residential block moments earlier now carried a subtle tension, the kind that made curtains shift and front doors crack open just enough for eyes to observe without being seen. The HOA woman stood near the truck with visible confidence, her posture rigid, her expression already shaped into the look of someone expecting validation. She believed she had done everything right. In her mind, this was merely a formality before authority confirmed her power. The officers began by surveying the scene. The truck was stationary, legally parked, and showed no visible signs of damage, tampering, or abandonment. It did not match the usual profile of a suspicious vehicle. One officer walked slowly around it, noting the condition, the registration, and the lack of any immediate violations. Another glanced toward the house it was parked in front of, already sensing that the situation was not as straightforward as it had been described. The HOA woman continued to position herself as the central figure of the narrative. She emphasized her role in maintaining order, hinted at past issues with compliance, and framed the truck as an ongoing concern rather than a one-time issue. She spoke in absolutes, implying that her authority was understood and accepted by everyone in the community. She expected the officers to take her word as fact. But police procedure did not operate on assumptions. The officers began asking structured questions, seeking timelines and specific actions. When they asked how she became aware of the truck, her answers became less precise. When they asked how long it had been there, she exaggerated. When they asked whether she had attempted to contact the owner, she deflected. Each question pulled slightly at the edges of her story, loosening the tight narrative she had constructed. Then the focus shifted to the truck itself. One officer noticed the small but unmistakable indicator of an active security system. Another pointed out the placement of cameras integrated into the vehicle's exterior. These were not aftermarket decorations. They were functional, discreet, and clearly operational. That observation alone changed the tone of the interaction. The possibility that events had been recorded introduced an objective version of the truth, one that could not be reshaped by confidence or titles. At that moment, the owner emerged from the house. There was no rush, no confrontation, no raised gestures. The owner approached calmly, already having watched the entire sequence unfold through recorded footage. The presence was steady and controlled, contrasting sharply with the HOA woman's escalating agitation. The owner did not accuse or argue. Instead, they simply acknowledged the officers and confirmed ownership of the truck. That confirmation immediately dissolved the claim of abandonment. The officers then asked a crucial question, whether anyone had attempted to access the vehicle without permission. The owner responded by indicating that the vehicle's security system had detected multiple attempts to unlock it. Without dramatizing the situation, the owner offered to provide the footage. The HOA woman's confidence faltered for the first time. She attempted to redirect the narrative, suggesting that HOA inspection rights might justify her actions. She leaned on vague language about community rules and oversight. But when asked directly whether she had attempted to unlock the truck, she hesitated. That hesitation carried more weight than any accusation. The footage was reviewed on the spot. It showed a clear sequence of events: the HOA woman approaching the truck, the repeated attempts to unlock the door, the shifting positions, the checking of handles, the persistent effort. The timestamps aligned precisely with her earlier statements, exposing inconsistencies she could no longer explain away. What made the footage especially damaging was not just the act itself, but the demeanor. There was no sign of confusion or mistake. The actions were deliberate, confident, and repeated. It was clear that she believed she had the right to do what she was doing. The officers exchanged glances. This was no longer a simple neighborhood dispute. Unauthorized attempts to access a private vehicle crossed into criminal territory. The fact that she had initiated police involvement herself added a layer of irony she clearly hadn't anticipated. The call meant to assert her authority had instead triggered scrutiny of her behavior. As the officers explained the seriousness of the situation, the HOA woman's tone shifted. Her posture softened. Her voice lost its edge, and her earlier certainty dissolved into defensiveness. She began to minimize her actions, reframing them as routine checks, harmless oversight, or misunderstandings. But the footage remained unchanged, immune to reinterpretation. Neighbors had begun gathering more openly now. Some stood at the edges of their driveways, others lingered on sidewalks, drawn by the growing realization that something significant was unfolding. Many recognized the HOA woman immediately. They had seen her issue warnings, enforce rules, and assert control for years. Few had ever seen her challenged. The officers continued their process methodically. They clarified that HOA authority did not extend to accessing personal vehicles. They explained that possessing or claiming a master key did not grant legal permission. They emphasized that calling the police under false pretenses could itself carry consequences. Each clarification dismantled another piece of the authority she thought she held. The owner remained largely silent throughout, letting the evidence speak. That restraint only strengthened the impact of the truth. There was no need for emotional appeals or arguments. The situation had shifted entirely into the realm of documented facts and legal boundaries. The HOA woman began to realize the gravity of her mistake. Her attempt to control the situation had backfired completely. Instead of exposing a violation, she had exposed herself. Instead of reinforcing her dominance, she had revealed its fragility. The very system she relied on to intimidate others was now scrutinizing her actions. The officers informed her that further steps would need to be taken. They explained that unauthorized access attempts could not be dismissed as HOA business. They noted the presence of clear evidence and witnesses. They made it clear that this was no longer about community rules, but about the law. As one officer stepped away to confirm next steps, the HOA woman stood surrounded by neighbors who were seeing her differently for the first time. The fear and deference she had cultivated were fading, replaced by curiosity, disbelief, and, for some, quiet vindication. The balance of power had shifted. And as the officers returned, ready to proceed based on what they had confirmed, it became clear that this incident would not end with a warning or a lecture. It was moving toward consequences, real ones. The air in the neighborhood had shifted completely. What began as a quiet morning of routine parking had evolved into a high-stakes situation no one anticipated. The police had completed their preliminary investigation, reviewing footage, confirming ownership, and verifying timestamps. The HOA woman, once untouchable in the eyes of her neighbors, stood frozen, her confident facade beginning to crack under the weight of reality. Every step she had taken to assert authority was now being examined through the lens of legality rather than entitlement. The officers called her aside, keeping their tone professional but firm. They began explaining that the attempts to unlock the truck constituted unauthorized entry, a violation that could be interpreted as attempted theft or tampering. They emphasized that intent mattered just as much as action, and the evidence clearly indicated deliberate efforts. They were calm but resolute, and there was no room for manipulation. She tried to protest, weaving a story about HOA rights and community standards, but the officers were unmoved. The security footage, precise and damning, left little room for debate. The neighbors, now fully aware of the unfolding drama, watched from a safe distance. Some were curious, others openly satisfied. Many had witnessed her overreach over the years, the fines issued for minor landscaping variations, the letters demanding compliance with trivial aesthetic rules, the countless confrontations with residents who had dared to challenge her. For years, she had leveraged HOA power to intimidate and control. But now, for the first time, she was under scrutiny herself, and her authority was crumbling. The officers informed her that she would need to be formally cited and that a report would be filed documenting the incident. They also warned her that making a false report to law enforcement could carry its own consequences. Her earlier call to 911, intended to reinforce her position, had inadvertently flagged her for potential legal action. Every action she had taken was now documented, analyzed, and recorded. The irony was palpable. The system she believed she controlled was now holding her accountable. Meanwhile, the truck's owner remained composed. They had watched everything unfold calmly, relying on security systems and evidence rather than confrontation. They knew that patience and documentation would carry more weight than anger or emotion. Each glance at the officers reinforced the clarity of ownership. The truck belonged to them, no question. Their property rights were undeniable, and the presence of technology had ensured that no claim of misunderstanding could hold. The HOA woman, however, was beginning to panic. Her breathing quickened as the reality sank in. What had started as a minor attempt at enforcement had escalated into a potential criminal matter. She had acted publicly, in full view of neighbors, and recorded on video. There was no escaping accountability. The confidence that had once allowed her to roam the neighborhood policing private property was now replaced by uncertainty and fear. Officers instructed her to step away from the truck while they completed the necessary documentation. Cameras from nearby homes had captured the incident from multiple angles, and additional witnesses began to provide statements. Each account corroborated the video evidence. She had approached the vehicle repeatedly, attempted to manipulate the locks, and refused to stop until authorities arrived. The mounting evidence left her without defense. By mid-morning, the situation had drawn the attention of the broader neighborhood. People gathered along sidewalks, whispering to one another and speculating about the outcome. Some had always suspected she wielded HOA power aggressively, but few had seen such a dramatic confrontation. The air buzzed with a mix of anticipation and vindication, a collective acknowledgement that the balance of power in the neighborhood was shifting. When the officers finally began taking formal action, it was both swift and deliberate. They placed her in handcuffs, explaining the specific reasons for her detainment while keeping the process professional. The neighbors watched in stunned silence, some snapping photos discreetly while others simply observed. This was unprecedented. A figure who had long intimidated the community now found herself subjected to the same scrutiny and authority she had wielded. Even as she was led away, her attempts to justify her actions continued, though they fell on deaf ears. Her protests were drowned out by the undeniable evidence, the officer's instructions, and the quiet, firm ownership of the property by its legal owner. The narrative she had tried to construct of a vigilant HOA enforcer maintaining neighborhood safety had collapsed entirely. The truck stood unscathed, a silent witness to the drama that had unfolded around it. Its owner returned to it, ensuring that nothing had been damaged or tampered with beyond the futile attempts at unlocking. The security system had documented everything, providing undeniable proof that the vehicle had been approached without consent. What might have been a stressful or threatening moment was transformed into a clear demonstration of property rights and the limits of HOA authority. Neighbors began to murmur among themselves. Some expressed relief that justice had been served. Others reflected on their own experiences with HOA enforcement, realizing that the woman's pattern of intimidation might finally be checked. For years they had tolerated her overreach, believing it to be harmless or inevitable. Now, seeing her restrained and accountable, they recognized that authority had boundaries and that abuse of power carried consequences. The police completed their paperwork and returned to their vehicles. The HOA woman, now detained, was being transported for further processing. The owner of the truck remained calm, reassured that their property was safe and their rights upheld. For the community, this incident marked a turning point, a reminder that rules and regulations did not grant unlimited power, and that technology, documentation, and law could protect those who respected boundaries. As the streets slowly returned to normal, the lingering tension and energy of the morning persisted. Conversations flowed between neighbors, recounting what had happened and sharing thoughts on HOA overreach, personal boundaries, and accountability. The incident became a story that would circulate for weeks, a viral moment in the neighborhood that no one would forget. Word of the incident spread quickly through the neighborhood. The arrest of the HOA woman became the topic of hushed conversations, phone calls, and online messages shared among residents. For many, it was difficult to reconcile the image of someone who had long held authority with the reality of seeing her handcuffed and escorted by police. The aura of invincibility she had cultivated over years of neighborhood policing had been shattered, leaving a mix of shock, vindication, and curiosity in its wake. Inside the police report, the details were precise. The footage from the truck's security cameras provided a minute-by-minute account of her actions. The timestamps were undeniable: multiple attempts to unlock the vehicle, repeated testing of handles, and lingering behavior that clearly showed intent. Witness statements corroborated the footage, painting a picture of deliberate action rather than casual oversight. Each layer of evidence removed any ambiguity about what had happened. The HOA woman, meanwhile, sat in a holding cell, her mind racing. In her previous life, she had relied on fear and intimidation to command compliance. Letters, fines, and the occasional threat of legal action had kept neighbors in check. But none of that authority mattered here. The law did not recognize HOA-imposed control over private property. The master key she had proudly brandished was meaningless. Her phone calls to 911, intended to cement her authority, had only ensured her accountability. Every misstep replayed in her mind, each one a reminder of how far her actions had crossed the line. Back in the neighborhood, the truck's owner continued their day with a mixture of relief and vigilance. They checked the vehicle, confirmed that nothing had been damaged, and ensured that all security alerts had been properly logged. There was no celebration, only a quiet acknowledgement of the outcome. This had been a moment to protect property and reinforce boundaries, not to gloat over someone else's misjudgment. The presence of cameras and documentation had made the difference, allowing them to remain calm while the situation unfolded. Neighbors began to reflect on the larger implications. The incident was not just about one HOA member overstepping. It was a vivid demonstration of the limits of authority and the risks of unchecked entitlement. People who had previously felt powerless against petty fines, aesthetic rules, or intrusive inspections suddenly saw that accountability was possible. Conversations moved beyond gossip into practical considerations. How could they safeguard their own property? How could they ensure that HOA power was applied fairly and legally? Social media within the neighborhood also began to react. Posts detailing the event circulated quickly, including still frames captured from security footage. Some neighbors expressed satisfaction that justice had been served. Others debated the legal nuances, emphasizing that HOA regulations could never override private property rights. Even residents who had previously supported the HOA woman's strict enforcement began to question the fairness and legality of her actions. The narrative was shifting rapidly and public opinion was tilting decisively against her. At the HOA board meeting later that week, the incident dominated the agenda. Board members who had previously avoided confrontation with the woman faced an awkward reality. The arrest had made the HOA itself appear vulnerable. Questions arose about internal oversight, the limits of authority granted to members, and how such a situation could be prevented in the future. The board recognized that their policies and enforcement mechanisms required review and that accountability was now a critical concern. Meanwhile, the legal process began in earnest. Charges of attempted unauthorized entry and filing a false report were prepared. The HOA woman faced a courtroom reality that was far different from the controlled environment of the neighborhood streets. Here, her confidence and assertiveness could not substitute for evidence, and her authority as an HOA figure held no weight. Lawyers and law enforcement reviewed the evidence meticulously. Every security camera recording, every witness statement, every time-stamped action became part of a legal chain that would determine the outcome. The community, meanwhile, continued to watch. Some residents felt a newfound sense of safety and empowerment. Others felt the need to reconsider their interactions with HOA members more broadly. The arrest was more than a single event. It was a precedent, a reminder that actions have consequences even in environments where power and control seem absolute. People began sharing their own stories, quietly building a collective awareness of HOA overreach and property rights. The HOA woman's personal reputation had already suffered irreparable damage. For years, she had relied on fear, intimidation, and assumed authority to maintain control. Now, neighbors saw her vulnerability in stark detail. Conversations in driveways, behind closed doors, and in online forums highlighted how drastically perceptions had shifted. The figure once considered untouchable was now a cautionary tale. Entitlement and arrogance could be exposed, recorded, and legally challenged. As the day ended, the truck remained in the driveway, untouched, secure, and a silent symbol of the limits of overreach. The owner continued to respect the property and maintain vigilance, understanding that boundaries were critical and that careful documentation could prevent future disputes. The neighborhood, meanwhile, had absorbed a powerful lesson about authority, accountability, and the real-world consequences of attempting to assert control beyond legal rights. The courtroom was a stark contrast to the familiar streets of the neighborhood. For the HOA woman, the confident strolls along sidewalks and driveways had been replaced by a formal and unforgiving environment. She was no longer the authority figure who dictated compliance. Here, she was a defendant, confronted by laws that did not bend to titles or self-proclaimed power. Each detail of her actions was under scrutiny, from the repeated attempts to access the truck to the call she had made to law enforcement under false pretenses. The room held no illusions. Evidence was king, and the truth was documented in every frame of security footage, every witness statement, every report compiled by the officers. The legal process unfolded meticulously. The prosecutor laid out the case with precision, emphasizing that unauthorized attempts to access private property were violations of both criminal statutes and basic property rights. The master key she had wielded, previously a symbol of her perceived authority, became a point of ridicule and serious concern in legal terms. Her own statements, once confident and assertive, were dissected for inconsistencies, revealing the intentional nature of her actions. Every lie, every deflection, and every assumption of power was now a matter of public record. The HOA woman's defense struggled to maintain credibility. Arguments that HOA guidelines granted her the right to inspect private vehicles were swiftly dismantled. HOA authority did not extend to personal property, nor did it grant immunity from legal scrutiny. References to vague covenant clauses or prior neighborhood incidents were irrelevant in the face of clear documentation. She attempted to frame the incident as a misunderstanding or an overzealous but harmless action. But the evidence told a different story. The footage captured intent, persistence, and a deliberate attempt to access private property without consent. Meanwhile, back in the neighborhood, reactions continued to ripple. Residents shared updates with one another, watching news reports and court summaries with a mix of fascination and relief. The arrest had already sent a powerful message, but seeing the formal legal consequences reinforced the lesson. Authority has limits, and those who exceed them can face serious repercussions. Conversations about HOA oversight, property rights, and personal vigilance became more common. Residents reflected on their own experiences with fines, inspections, and warnings, realizing that the law, not fear, was the ultimate arbiter. The homeowner of the truck, meanwhile, remained calm throughout the proceedings. They did not seek retribution beyond ensuring accountability and protecting their property. Their security measures and documentation had been pivotal in bringing the case to light. Each step of the legal process validated their actions, showing that careful preparation and adherence to the law could counter even the most aggressive overreach. During hearings, expert testimony on HOA authority, property law, and neighborhood governance highlighted the broader implications of the case. The incident was no longer an isolated dispute, but a precedent-setting example of what happens when personal entitlement collides with legal boundaries. Lawyers emphasized that the actions of one overzealous individual could not redefine the rights of residents, nor could they justify breaking the law. The HOA woman's reputation, both legally and socially, was being scrutinized in ways that could affect her standing for years to come. As the case progressed, her attempts to maintain credibility weakened. Each recounting of events was met with evidence that contradicted her narrative. Security footage replayed the repeated attempts to unlock the truck, time-stamped and clear. Neighbors' statements verified the behavior observed. Officers' reports detailed every interaction. The legal system operated on facts, not assumptions, and the pattern of her overreach became undeniable. The HOA board, watching from a distance, recognized the need for reform. Policies governing inspections, access, and enforcement were reviewed in light of the incident. Discussions focused on creating clear boundaries, ensuring transparency, and preventing unilateral interpretations of authority. The arrest had revealed vulnerabilities not just in individual behavior, but in the structure of the HOA itself. The board realized that unchecked power could expose both individuals and the organization to serious legal and reputational risks. For the HOA woman, the combination of public embarrassment, legal consequences, and loss of perceived authority was overwhelming. The community she had dominated for years now saw her actions for what they were, a dangerous mix of entitlement and disregard for the law. Every neighbor who had once felt intimidated now felt a sense of empowerment, recognizing that rules could not override rights and that accountability was inevitable. The courtroom drama became a turning point, not just for the individuals involved, but for the entire neighborhood. It demonstrated that technology, vigilance, and adherence to the law could counter even the most aggressive overreach. It reinforced the principle that HOA authority, while real in certain contexts, had clear limits. Most importantly, it showed that personal entitlement could be challenged and held accountable even when wielded by someone accustomed to control. The courtroom had delivered its judgment. a clear reflection of the law and the facts that had been painstakingly documented. The HOA woman faced penalties appropriate for her actions: citations for unauthorized entry, mandatory community service, and a formal warning regarding the misuse of emergency services. Beyond the legal consequences, she endured the most striking change in status: the complete erosion of her assumed authority within the neighborhood. For years, she had relied on fear, intimidation, and selective enforcement to maintain control. Now every neighbor understood that those tactics carried consequences and could no longer go unchecked. The news of the judgment traveled quickly. Conversations that once whispered about HOA rules and mysterious citations now openly acknowledged the limits of personal power. Residents reflected on the broader lessons. Authority is not infinite. Security measures matter, and community trust is earned rather than demanded. The arrest, courtroom proceedings, and final judgment had shifted perceptions irrevocably. The neighborhood had witnessed not just an overreach, but a reversal of power, one that reinforced the importance of legal boundaries over personal entitlement. The truck's owner continued life with quiet satisfaction. The vehicle remained in pristine condition, its security system validated as an essential safeguard. More than that, the situation had reinforced a sense of confidence that personal rights, when respected and documented, could withstand even the most aggressive attempts at overreach. They had not sought public spectacle or revenge. They had simply maintained evidence, acted responsibly, and allowed the law to take its course. The result was justice, not only for themselves but for every neighbor who had silently endured the HOA woman's previous actions. The HOA board, now acutely aware of the incident's implications, implemented reforms to prevent any recurrence. Guidelines were clarified, enforcement protocols were formalized, and unilateral actions by members were strictly prohibited. Communication channels were improved so residents could report concerns without fear of retaliation, and accountability measures were reinforced. The incident became a teaching moment, a concrete example of how power could be misused and the importance of checks and balances within a community. Socially, the neighborhood dynamic shifted. The aura of fear the HOA woman had cultivated dissipated almost instantly. Residents became more vocal about their rights and more willing to challenge ambiguous or excessive enforcement. The community began to rely on transparency rather than intimidation, on communication rather than secrecy. People who had previously felt powerless discovered that vigilance, documentation, and patience could protect them from overreach. In essence, the event had rebalanced the power structure of the entire neighborhood. For the HOA woman herself, life after the incident was markedly different. Her influence diminished, her credibility eroded, and her reputation permanently altered. Where she had once been a figure of authority, she now became a cautionary tale, remembered for the moment when her entitlement collided with the law. The handcuffs, the courtroom, the neighborhood whispers, all served as reminders that personal power has limits and misuse of authority carries consequences. She had attempted to claim dominance over a vehicle and its owner, but the result was the exact opposite: a complete loss of control and a permanent record of wrongdoing. The truck remained, unbothered and secure, a silent symbol of personal property rights prevailing over unwarranted intrusion. Its presence in the driveway was more than practical. It represented the balance of law and justice, the triumph of diligence over arrogance, and the necessity of accountability in community life. Neighbors could walk past it and recall the incident not with fear, but with a sense of reassurance that boundaries were clear and enforceable. Months later, the story continued to circulate among residents, often retold in a mixture of disbelief and humor. It became a benchmark for discussions about HOA power, entitlement, and legal accountability. New residents were informed of the incident as a cautionary tale. Longtime residents reflected on it as proof that even entrenched authority could be challenged successfully. In every recounting, the lesson was clear. Entitlement without boundaries leads to downfall. Vigilance protects rights, and law prevails over arrogance. The neighborhood had learned a critical lesson, and the HOA woman's actions, once a source of intimidation, had instead become a powerful example of accountability. The balance had shifted permanently. Those who had once feared her now recognized that rules, respect, and legal authority mattered more than threats or assumed control. Justice had been served, lessons had been learned, and the community emerged stronger, wiser, and more unified than before. The story of the HOA woman, the truck, and the consequences of overreach concluded not with drama or revenge, but with clarity. Entitlement has limits, evidence matters, and authority is earned, not assumed. The neighborhood returned to its routines, but the memory of that day endured, a reminder that law, integrity, and patience always prevail over arrogance. The end. If you liked this story, please like, subscribe, and share it with others so they can learn something from it too.